Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, let me begin by congratulating Algeria on the assumption of the UN Security Council presidency. And I'd like to also thank the UK, Guyana, Slovenia for calling this urgent meeting. I would also like to take the opportunity to commend my own team, Team USA, for getting us through a successful presidency in December. I'd like to welcome the new members of the Council as well, and we look forward to working with you. I'd like to thank Ms. Orsanu and Ms. Bechdel for their briefing, and I welcome the participation of Egypt and Sudan in this meeting. The December 24 Integrated Food Security Phase Classification Famine Review Committee report is deeply alarming and shocking, as Ms. Orsanu stated. Secretary Blinken reiterated when he was here last month, and I quote, "The world cannot, must not, look away from the humanitarian catastrophe that is happening in Sudan on our watch," unquote. Colleagues, this report only reaffirms what we already know. Sudan is experiencing one of the greatest human crises, not only of the day, but our lifetime. We can quiver over what we call it, but none of us can quiver over the fact that people are suffering in Sudan. At least 5 areas are currently experiencing famine. In 5 more, we see projected famine over the coming months. And at least 17 additional areas are at risk of famine in the same period. Over 500,000 people, including children, are struggling to survive. 12 million people have fled their homes due to fighting between the Sudanese armed forces and the Rapid Support Forces. And now, as a result of 20 months of brutal civil war, over half of Sudan's population is acutely food insecure. The Sudanese authorities' decision to suspend their collaboration with the IPC system and impede international efforts to provide humanitarian assistance and prevent starvation is simply unacceptable. We urge the Transitional Sovereign Council to immediately re-engage with the IPC and take affirmative steps to address the widespread food insecurity. Refusal to cooperate will only disrupt donor efforts and further damage Sudan's credibility with respect to its humanitarian obligations under international law. In addition, both military factions must facilitate the establishment of humanitarian hubs to support the flow of aid and cease all diversions and theft of it. Colleagues, both the SAF and RSF have failed to meet their commitments under the 2023 Jeddah Declaration to allow and facilitate the rapid and unimpeded passage of humanitarian aid and to protect humanitarian workers. December 20th, an area attack on the World Food Program compound in Blue Nile State killed 3 humanitarian workers. We must do everything to protect humanitarian workers, to clear obstructions from humanitarian corridors into and across Sudan, and to mitigate the dangers humanitarians face in delivering assistance. We also note with deep concern reports of ongoing ethnically targeted violence, indiscriminate attacks on civilian infrastructure, attacks on protected spaces like IDP camps, and pervasive conflict-related sexual violence. Each and every member sitting here today has seen the evidence that the SAF and RSF have committed war crimes. Each and every member sitting here today has seen evidence the RSF has committed crimes against humanity and engaged in ethnic cleansing. It's why this council met just 2 months ago to discuss a resolution calling for a nationwide ceasefire, increased civilian protection, and unhindered flow of aid. 14 council members approved the text drafted by Sierra Leone and the UK. And yet Russia chose obstruction, standing alone as it voted to imperil civilians while funding both sides of the conflict. Yes, that's what I said, both sides. Nevertheless, we will continue to work tirelessly to prevent abuses and hold perpetrators to account. We urge all members of this council to do the same, to prioritize the lives of civilians over domestic policy objectives. For our part, the United States has imposed sanctions in response to atrocities and arms procurement, and we are prepared to take further action soon. Now we renew our call for collective action, asking partners to join us in imposing sanctions on individuals and organizations whose actions have worsened this conflict. We also once again appealed to the international community to support Sudan's refugees. We want to express our deep appreciation to the countries already hosting some 3.2 million Sudanese people while they await with hope returning home in safety and dignity. Most of all, we call on all actors to stop these ongoing atrocities, to end the fighting and allow immediate, unconditional, and unhindered humanitarian access so that tens of millions of people can get the food and water, shelter and medicine they so desperately need. Colleagues, this is, in all likelihood, my final council meeting as United States Ambassador to the United Nations. It is fitting that it touches on a crisis I have spent the last few years working to alleviate in a region I've spent my entire career working to uplift. Fitting, yes, also heartbreaking. I wish I was leaving with a sense of closure on at least one such file, that I was taking with me a real confidence that tomorrow would bring a brighter day for the people of Sudan. I wish I could tell the Sudanese refugees I met all those months ago in Chad, the Sudanese refugees that I met all those years ago in that very same camp in Chad, that everything would be okay, that help was on the way. And yet, despite the devastating reality they face, for all the disappointment that I couldn't do more, that we, all of us, didn't do more, I still remain hopeful. Hopeful that the representatives sitting around this table, the colleagues who have become friends, will continue this sacred mission, this ultimate responsibility. Thank you.
I thank the representative of United States. May I add that we are already missing you. I now give the floor to the representative of the Russian Federation.
Thank you, Mr. President. We're grateful to the OCHA Director of Operations, Ms. Edem Wasonu, and the Deputy Director General of the FAO, Ms. Beth Bechtel, for their briefings. We welcome the participation in this meeting of the Permanent Representative of Sudan and of Egypt as well. We regret to acknowledge that the humanitarian situation in Sudan remains difficult. Almost 3/4 of medical facilities aren't operational. There's a shortage of medicines. 2/3 of people do not have access to medical care. There have been reports of dangerous diseases spreading. The 2024 Humanitarian Response Plan hasn't been implemented yet, which is a serious challenge. We've read very carefully the report tabled by the Famine Review Committee, the FRC. It covers the period between October 2024 and the present, giving forecasts out to May 2025. The report states that up to 637,000 Sudanese could face the threat of imminent famine in the very near future. It also notes some positive trends. Over the last reporting period, across the country, the number of people facing malnutrition fell by 1 million. Let's underscore right away, Sudan isn't experiencing, nor can it be experiencing serious famine. As the authors emphasize, there's only a risk of such a situation developing in 5 small areas in the country, 4 of which are camps for refugees. Sudan has between 7.5 and 8.5 million hectares of fertile land. Most of these are irrigated areas. By this yardstick, Sudan is much better placed than most Arab and many African countries. According to the Ministry of Agriculture of Sudan, during the current growing year, up to 6 to 7 million tons of grain might be collected, first and foremost corn and sorghum, whereas the annual needs stand at between 4 and 4.5 million tons. As for other key crops, including wheat, Sudan can meet its needs using imports. All of these statistics is something that the WFP and the FAO in the country have at their disposal. Against this backdrop, the conclusions in the report look strange, to say the least. First, the data is purely speculative, it's forecasts. As a reminder, in previous reports published by the FRC, Sudan was already foretold that it would face imminent famine, and this in September-October 2024. As we can see, such alarmist assessments did not come to pass. Second, the report was tabled remotely, without information being collected on the ground. Let me remind you that back in 2022, representatives of the FRC were working very well with the relevant ministries and agencies in Sudan, painstakingly gathering information about food security, conferring with the country's government, which provided the FRC with all of the necessary information. And yet, there were no such visits in 2024. What also drew our attention is that the FRC's assessments do not fully align with the analysis undertaken by the country team, that is the Sudan IPC Technical Working Group, which, in contrast to the FRC, is working in the field and includes not only representatives of the UN and NGOs, but also government bodies. This is pointed out in the report, yet there are no additional clarifications provided about this point. We'd be interested to find out where the discrepancies in the assessments of hunger in Sudan lie. We're surprised by the fact that while the IPC country team continued to confer with the Sudanese about the contents of the report up to the 24th of December, before this work was completed, the FRC's report was disseminated in the Western media already on the 23rd of December. It would appear they wanted to promote these uncorroborated speculations about the issue of famine before the Christmas break. This cannot but arouse suspicions about potential manipulations with these materials. In other words, the authors didn't deem it necessary to coordinate with the Sudanese to verify information using the right sources. Just like in previous years, instead they deemed it necessary to create a media frenzy first and foremost. What also drew our attention is that IPC and FRC publications were using outdated demographic data, which they received back in 2022. They didn't factor in the large numbers of IDPs and refugees, the fact that there's been an outpour of people outpouring into other countries. What's more is the latest report asserts that an assessment was conducted of the famine situation in 15 out of 18 states in Sudan, including Darfur and Kordofan. Specialist access to these states is restricted owing to ongoing military hostilities. So how did the authors draw their conclusions? Why were the states in the report colored in dark red? Upon examining the FRC report, we couldn't but think that the issue of hunger in Sudan is being politicized and exploited to exert pressure on the country's government. some Security Council members are enthusiastically seizing upon this speculation and discussing them. You get the impression that someone desperately wants for famine to begin at last in Sudan. What's more is, an important issue is being forgotten: the deliberate obstruction of agricultural activities, the distribution of foodstuffs by insurgents in areas they control, as well as these insurgents emptying food supplies. Mr. President, all of the above, everything I've just said, without a doubt, does nothing to resolve the issue of the dire humanitarian situation in Sudan and the issue of Sudanese refugees in neighboring countries. Nor does it take away from the need to take measures to improve the situation. As we've underscored many times, in order to improve food security in Sudan, we must ensure the equal distribution of food, as well as address the issue of ordinary Sudanese lacking the financial resources to buy such food. We believe that instead of instrumentalizing the topic of hunger and humanitarian access, what should be front of mind is agricultural development, farmers' access to markets to sell their foodstuffs, and the distribution of food vouchers among the people. We know that there are various UN system agencies which are doing this work. We are very much in favor of broadening such programs. Port Sudan's efforts to improve the situation so as to ensure people have enough food should receive reliable support from UN agencies and their partners, but also from all states friendly to Sudan. It's important for these efforts to be channeled exclusively through the central government. It must not be used to promote destructive agendas in the country using humanitarian issues. Time and time again, Port Sudan has shown flexibility in addressing these various problems, proactively opening aid access through a number of cross-border points. It's working to broaden the centers of humanitarian deliveries within Sudan. We call on everyone not to whip up tensions by demanding the government to lift all bureaucratic restrictions, including the issuance of visas and permits to move around the country. These issues are the sovereign prerogative of Sudan. Hence, demanding Sudan to automatically resolve these issues is tantamount to casting doubt on its sovereignty. Moreover, denying the issuance of 10-odd visas out of several thousand is hardly grounds is hardly decisive. As for the restrictions the government is imposing on movement, these are to a large extent aimed at bolstering the protection afforded to humanitarian workers themselves, who unfortunately continue to be put in danger in Sudan. On our side, the Russian Federation continues to contribute to humanitarian assistance in Sudan. On the 30th of December, yet another consignment of Russian food aid was delivered, 70 tons in fact. Furthermore, speaking more broadly, resolving Sudan's humanitarian and food-related issues is inextricably linked to the need for a swift cessation of military hostilities and the start of a political settlement process. After the acute phase of the conflict is over, it's important to take practical steps so as to resume the widest possible intra-Sudanese dialogue. Having said that, we deem any destructive external interference in the affairs of the friendly state of Sudan unacceptable. As for what a number of Western delegations said today, the fact that we blocked a UN Security Council resolution on the 18th of November, in response to that, we'd like to underscore that going forward, we will not allow imbalanced Council decisions to pass, those which undermine, for the benefit of the sponsors of Sudan's instability, undermining Sudan's territorial integrity and sovereignty. We stand convinced that the Sudanese people can and should itself resolve its own internal problems. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation